Imagine finding the bodies of everyone you love, knowing they died just minutes ago. Your wives, your children, all 5 of them. Now imagine that grief transforming into something so dark, so absolute, that you abandon your rifle, your only chance at survival, and pick up a hatchet instead. Because you don't care if you live anymore. You only care that your enemies suffer. That's exactly what happened to Chief Gall on June 25, 1876. And what he did next would turn one of the most famous battles in American history into a massacre that still haunts us today. For over a century, we've only heard Custer's last stand told from one side. But Gall was there. He saw everything. And when he finally spoke 10 years later, the story he told was so different from what Americans believed that historians are still fighting about it. By the end of this video, I'm going to show you evidence that completely changes who fired the first shot, who died last, and whether Custer's famous last stand even happened the way we've been told. The truth is darker and more complicated than you think. But first, if you're fascinated by untold stories from history, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. June 25, 1876. Chief Gall woke up that morning with no idea he'd spend the rest of his life replaying what came next. He was 36 years old, a seasoned Hunkpapa Sioux warrior who'd earned his reputation the hard way, in combat against both American soldiers and rival tribes. Sitting Bull trusted him enough to adopt him as a younger brother. When you're that close to one of history's most famous Native American leaders, you don't question much. You prepare for what's coming. Except Gall had no idea what was coming. A few hours before Lieutenant Colonel George Custer arrived at the Little Bighorn, Sioux scouts found something odd a few miles from camp: ration boxes, dropped and abandoned. They knew immediately what it meant. American soldiers were close. Too close. The scouts barely got a look before soldiers spotted them and chased them off. But Custer understood the math. Those scouts would warn the village, and Sitting Bull would disappear into the vast Montana territory. So he made a decision that would define his legacy. Attack now, before they could run. The scouts sprinted back with the warning. Sitting Bull called a council. The other leaders agreed. Break camp, move fast, get out before the cavalry arrived. Smart plan, realistic plan, they just didn't have enough time. Before anyone could pack, Major Marcus Reno's men came charging through the timber, bullets ripping through the southern edge of camp. Gall was there when it started. His section of the village, the Hunkpapa, sat directly in Reno's path. Chaos, gunfire tearing through tents, women and children scattering south, away from the attack, warriors scrambling for horses and weapons. Gall's first instinct? Find his family. He didn't have to search long. His 2 wives, his 3 children, all 5, dead by the time he reached them. Whether Reno's men targeted them or whether they were caught in the crossfire, we'll never know. What we do know is what Gall said afterward. It made my heart bad. That's how the Sioux described it. Not anger, not grief alone. A heart gone bad. Despair mixed with something far more dangerous. After that, Gall said, I killed all my enemies with the hatchet. Understand what that meant. The hatchet wasn't practical. Rifles killed from a distance kept you alive. The hatchet required you to get close, to trade your own safety for brutality. It was the weapon of a man who stopped caring whether he survived, as long as his enemy suffered. Reno had maybe 150 men. They'd tied their horses in the timber, advanced on foot, formed a firing line a few hundred feet from camp, and opened up. But hundreds of Sioux warriors were already pouring in to defend their families. More arrived every minute. Here's something most people don't know. Sitting Bull didn't actually fight that day. He'd stopped taking the field years earlier. Instead, he stayed in camp making medicine, a kind of spiritual power meant to strengthen the warriors. The real commanders in combat? Men like Gall, men like Crazy Horse. The Sioux hit Reno's line with a mounted charge, and the Americans realized fast they were outnumbered and outmatched. Among Reno's troops were native scouts from the Crow and Arikara peoples, traditional enemies of the Sioux. The Sioux warriors made sure to target them specifically. One of those scouts was named Bloody Knife, half Arikara, half Hunkpapa Sioux, the same tribe as Gall. They'd grown up together. They hated each other. Gall never trusted Bloody Knife's mixed heritage, and his treatment of him eventually drove Bloody Knife away to join the Americans. The hatred became mutual, personal. Gall had killed Bloody Knife's brothers, one of his sons. They were mortal enemies. Bloody Knife was mounted beside Major Reno when a bullet went through his head. Gall didn't have a rifle that day, so we know it wasn't him. But one of the other Sioux must have recognized him, must have known exactly who they were shooting. The sight of Bloody Knife's death, right there, blood and brain matter spraying, broke something in Reno. He ordered the retreat, and that's when the real killing started. Reno's men tried to pull back into the timber, mount up, flee across the river. But retreating cavalry makes for easy targets. Gall and the other warriors chased them down, dragging soldiers from their horses, hacking them apart, shooting them in the back as they rode for their lives. 32 Americans fell before the survivors clawed their way up the hills on the far side of the river. Gall wanted to pursue, finish them, but terrified shouts stopped him cold. The second American force was coming from the north. If they broke through into the village, they'd take the women and children. Everything would be lost. So Gall and 3 other warriors raced north to face Custer. Now here's where Gall's story diverges from almost every other account. He claimed he led a small scouting party along the bluffs, tracking Custer as he approached. They stopped on a hill about 600 yards out, just watching, judging. One officer rode ahead with binoculars, scouting the path. Custer had cut his famous long golden hair short for this campaign, so Gall didn't recognize him. The Sioux called Custer Longhair. Without the hair, he was just another cavalry officer. No one knew him from anyone else, Gall said later. We could not tell him from any other. According to Gall, Custer hesitated when he saw the village. Stopped, waited for his command to catch up, like the moment he realized he'd miscalculated badly. And then, in Gall's version, the Sioux attacked first, not Custer. The Americans were still crossing the bluffs about 3/4 of a mile from the river when Gall's warriors charged. Custer's famous last stand? According to Gall, it wasn't a failed attack, it was a failed defense. Other warriors tell different stories. Lazy White Bull said Custer's attack began almost immediately after Reno was driven back. The timeline suggests Gall probably arrived to find Custer's men already retreating up the east bank, mistaking the chaos for the start of battle rather than the middle. Either way, what followed was a slaughter. Lines of American bodies found afterward told the story, a chaotic retreat, men falling every few meters. The Springfield carbines they carried had a nasty habit of jamming under heavy use. Gall watched soldiers throw down useless rifles and draw revolvers instead. Some ran out of ammunition mid-fight and were cut down by warriors with nothing but hatchets. The Sioux and Cheyenne did everything they could to spread panic. They used blankets and shouting to stampede loose horses into the American lines, causing the soldiers' own mounts to bolt. The charging animals terrified the troops and eliminated their only escape route. We took no prisoners, Gall admitted. Our hearts were bad, and we cut and shot them all to pieces. Custer's men were driven back toward the top of the bluffs, where they split into at least 2 groups. What remained of 3 companies stayed with Custer and his brother Tom, retreating toward what's now called Custer Hill. Gall didn't see Custer's last moments. Unlike so many other warriors who later claimed to have killed Longhair, Gall never took credit. And here's where his account gets really interesting. Gall insisted Custer's group weren't the last men standing. While some warriors pursued Custer up the hill, another group had already overtaken them and quickly encircled them. They cut the Americans down in minutes. The actual last stand, Gall said, happened southeast of Custer Hill. A second group under Custer's brother-in-law, Lieutenant James Calhoun, and an Irishman named Captain Miles Keogh headed that direction after splitting from Custer. They never broke, Gall said, but retired step by step all the way up the hill. When they realized they were surrounded, Calhoun's men dismounted and fought on foot to the last man. Keogh's company tried to link up with Custer along Battle Ridge. Keogh was shot off his horse en route. His men were found piled together nearby, having fought side by side until the end. They fought strong, Gall said, but it did not save them. The Custer fight lasted less than an hour, but the battle wasn't over. Gall turned south to finish what he'd started with Reno, to avenge his family. Reno's survivors had retreated to a hill where they waited for reinforcements. Captain Benteen and the pack train arrived around 4 in the afternoon. With 7 remaining companies of the 7th Cavalry combined, they began marching toward Custer's last known position. According to Gall, Custer's men were already dead by the time they set out. The Sioux and Cheyenne rallied and rode over the bluffs to find the Americans moving toward them. When the cavalry spotted the swarm of warriors charging and shooting, they chose survival over heroics. They retreated back to their hill and dug in. Over 400 men established a defensive circle on what became known as Reno Hill. For hours, the native warriors charged and probed, but couldn't break through before nightfall. Gall and Crazy Horse ordered their men to stop the attacks. Charging in darkness would only waste lives. Instead, they kept the Americans awake with sniper fire while the Sioux and Cheyenne warriors rested. Time would do the work for them. It will fall into our hands when the thirst burns in their throats and make them mad for a drink, they told the warriors. The prediction was accurate. Summer heat and dehydrated wounded men burned through water supplies fast. By the morning of June 26th, they were out. Gall posted snipers across the Little Bighorn to shoot at water parties trying to reach the ravine. Eventually, the Americans posted their own shooters to suppress Gall's snipers and secured a rout, a feat that earned several soldiers medals of honor. Later that afternoon, Sioux scouts spotted dust clouds on the horizon. General Alfred Terry and General John Gibbon were arriving for their planned rendezvous with Custer. Gall called it the Big Dust. Everyone agreed it was time to leave. The Native Americans broke off the attack and packed up fast. By sunset on the 26th, Sitting Bull's village had escaped west toward the Bighorn Mountains. It was a tremendous victory for the Sioux. It wouldn't last. The Americans renewed their campaign in the following months and ultimately forced surrender. Gall, Sitting Bull, and many others fled north to Canada. Eventually, Gall and Sitting Bull had a falling out. Gall took his followers back to U.S. territory, settled at Standing Rock Reservation, converted to Christianity, and befriended the American officials running the place. In 1886, they convinced him to attend a 10th anniversary ceremony at Little Bighorn. Gall's presence surprised everyone. It also gave him a chance to meet battle survivors and do something remarkable: tell the story from his side. America had only heard the soldiers' version. Now, using a mix of Lakota, English, and sign language, Gall did his best to answer questions and share what he remembered. There are multiple versions of his story from different sources. The account published in Chicago on June 26, 1886, differs from the one in the St. Paul Pioneer Press a month later. In the St. Paul version, Gall was at the north end of camp when the battle started and never fought Reno's men, only Custer's. In another account from 1890, he fought in both battles, but never mentioned his dead family.